I hope. Can. Tired there.
You good, Karen?
I'm good. Karen, did you get a chance to read your,
Oh, I have not. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, sure, go ahead. Call to order a meeting for the Normal Town Council for February 3rd, 2020. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus,
Here.
Mr. McCarthy,
Here.
Ms. Cummings,
Here.
Mr. Nord,
Here.
Ms. Smith,
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Here.
Mr. Preston.
Here.
We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have one person who wishes to address the council tonight under public comment. It'd be Mr. Doug Fansler.
Hi, I'm Doug Fansler. I live on Carriage Hills Road in Normal. I would like to, before my comments, just thank the town, Wayne and his group that I've been walking around quite a bit and found several places on sidewalks that have been problematic for walking, muddy and leaves and all kinds of things, and they've done a good job of fixing that. I know that I've also asked, and it was difficult to actually enter those through your website, and hopefully Pam, I know, has indicated that there'll be some changes coming, so look forward to that. My topic tonight was related to the group that spoke at your at the last meeting, and I had sent an email asking some of these questions. I haven't received very much in an answer, so I wanted to address publicly what my questions were. I wonder who invited that group to speak or enabled them to speak at the council meeting. I wonder why they weren't directed to either the McLean County Emergency Services. Seems like a better place for them to actually get direction and funding and planning that's needed. Maybe possibly the Illinois Emergency Services. Definitely at some point, I think FEMA make the plan, and that for the heating and cooling makes a lot of sense. I definitely agree with that. It just seems like this was not, wasn't a good place to get any of those things done. So I'm wondering why that wasn't. They weren't directed to those people. I didn't get any information about the older gentleman. I'm sorry, I don't know his name. Bill. I don't remember what his name was that spoke. He was seemed to he had his hockey stick graph and his warnings of demise that didn't seem to tie well to the fact. I agree we need a warning and a cooling plan, but those seem theatrical. And what were his credentials to speak as a in his climate role that he seemed to be speaking in? And again, I emailed most of these questions, and I received very little answers from staff and council, and I'm a little disappointed that at least some of those questions couldn't have been answered prior to today. Thank you.
We move to the omnibus agenda items considered routine in nature and will be taken with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. Ms. Smith?
D.
I'm sorry?
D.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
B and C.
Motion
So moved.
approval.
Second.
We have approval of the minutes of the regular council meeting. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Ms. Cummings,
Aye.
Mr. Nord,
Aye.
Ms. Smith,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. Item B is a report to receive and file Town of Normal expenditures for payment as of January 29th, 2020. Mr. Nord.
I so move.
Second.
Mr. Nord?
My first question is on page 2 of the expense report. I know that, Ms. Reese, you've sent me information, but I just want to put this on public record. There's 6 registrations for the Association of Children's Museums, and there's 8 full-time staff, and 6 of them are going to this convention. As I mentioned in my email, we've got the cost of the registration, lodging, transportation. You've given me some of the numbers. The per diems, the additional payroll that's going to need to come up to cover the staff time while they're gone, and then lost productivity to get caught back up on the work. And I had asked if in the future, instead of sending 75% of the staff to a convention, maybe pull it back and have just a few go, and they could share information whenever they get back to their colleagues, just to try and save taxpayers some money. So that's my request.
I'd be happy to respond to that if that's all right. I actually didn't bring my budget with me, so I can't refer to the exact number of staff at the Children's Museum, but certainly the majority of their staff are part-time. Significant numbers of part-time staff during the day for programming and services. So as I shared with Mr. Nord and other council members today, the National Association of Children's Museums annual conference is in St. Louis, which is an incredible opportunity to take the train or a fleet vehicle, get down to St. Louis, take advantage of professional development opportunities. The people that are participating in this conference are educators. They are certified education professionals. They are assistant leadership and the leadership of the museum, and our exhibit manager, who's a new person, a new staff member in the last 6 months. And so this will be an opportunity for him to network with Children's Museums professionals. In addition, we will learn a lot, obviously for professional development, but we will also be able to explore what you ordinarily would see in a conference is exhibit hall. You make connections, you find vendors, and as you know, there's lots happening in the Children's Museum. And so I think it's an exceptional opportunity to go to St. Louis and for a handful of staff to learn more about best practices in the Children's Museum industry, and certainly early education and STEM initiatives, which are very important to the Children's Museum. So I hear what you're saying, Mr. Nord. It's a great opportunity. As I mentioned in our email exchange, last year's conference was in Denver. Certainly staff trekking out to Denver has a very different fiscal impact than 6 staff members going to St. Louis. So I do appreciate your perspective. We are very cautious about who we send to conferences and the money we spend. This was a budgeted expense, and I think it's very well worth it this year because of the proximity of this national conference in St. Louis. So,
I would add to that at conferences like this, there are multiple sessions going on all the time. It's not everybody is listening to the same information, so it diminishes the amount of information you can get at a conference. I'll reference back to 3 or 4 years ago when 4 of us went to National League of Cities, and we divided our conferences so that we were getting more information by attending different events during the course of the day.
Okay, and then on page, I guess it's the PDF page 21, the subsidy for Beaufort Partners LLC. This is, from what I gathered, a subsidy for one of the buildings in Uptown. Does this expense show up against the Uptown TIF?
I'm not exactly sure about that in terms of the relationship to the Uptown TIF. I can check with the finance staff, but the interest subsidy, and I'm not sure which page of the document is because I just have the hard copy, so I'm not sure about the PDF version, but the interest subsidy is per a redevelopment agreement that we have with Beaufort Partners, and that's the building down at the east end of East Beaufort on the north side. So it's right at the corner of Linden and Beaufort and College. So it's a long-standing redevelopment agreement. It's one of the first ones we've had in Uptown Renewal. I think it's been in existence since 2005. How it's accounted for in the TIF, I would have to explore that with finance and get back to you.
Okay, it's on the expense report, page 13.
Thank you.
I don't know if that explains it on there.
No, it just identifies what the check is cut for.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Further on this, please call the roll.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. Item C is a resolution retaining confidentiality of executive session minutes from June 19th, 2017, February 18th, 2019, April 15th, 2019, and December 19th, 2019. Ms. Smith?
Oh, no, that was Mr. Nord.
Mr. Nord.
Oh, I'm sorry. I read it wrong. Mr. Nord.
I so move.
Second.
With this one, this is just a clarification question. Are we just voting to keep the minutes private, or are we voting on any action which will have a fiscal impact?
There's never an action that's taken in an executive session. There's discussion, and any fiscal action that would come to the council.
Okay, so there's no fiscal impact?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith? Aye. Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item D is an ordinance abating the levy for the 2019 property taxes for Special Service Area Number 1. Ms. Smith, now it's your
I
turn.
move this item. This one
Thank
is
you.
mine.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Smith?
And I was in discussions with Ms. Reese just before the meeting, and I apologize for not giving you more of an advance on this in emails over the weekend. But could you please go over the calculation on D2 to put on the record how that tax levy amount that is rebated is determined and under what terms?
Yes, absolutely. What council's action tonight, presuming council approves the ordinance as proposed, is it's abating. So basically, last December, when council approved the property tax levy, part of the property tax levy applied to the College Hills Mall SSA. That levy we are mandatorily required to issue. And so we notified the county of the levy. What we're doing tonight is, with this action, then we would go back and tell the county to abate a portion of that levy. Because now the finance department has been able to see through calendar year 2019 what sales tax proceeds were achieved through the College Hills Mall SSA, which is a special service area. And those sales taxes that we can then take those sales taxes and apply that to the bond payment. And so what the difference is then is what we need in the property taxes, which is less than the amount that council levied last December. So it's a little bit convoluted, but the formula on the second page is trying to reflect what the original levy was, how much the sales tax proceeds are available for the bond payment, and we net that out and ask the county then to abate the difference.
And
Let me add to that SSAs or bonds are a little different animal in terms of normal bonding procedures. The town is the issuer of the bond, but the town has no financial obligation on the bond. We rebate this. In other words, if the area came up short of the $206,000 this year, then the agreement we have with College Hills Mall says that they would have to give us that money. So there's not a financial obligation for us on that.
Correct. So basically, the net impact of the property tax levy is just to make sure we have enough money from that special service area through property taxes to pay the bond payment.
And getting to your point, Mr. Mayor, so because of the relationship for this special service bond, this would not show up as an obligation of the town? Is that an accurate statement?
Yes.
It does show up as an obligation to the town, but it's applied only to specific properties in the special service area.
College Hill Small.
And shops at College Hill.
Correct.
Yep.
Do not use that
Yeah,
other
yeah,
term.
yeah, the old one, Shop Chat.
And is there a time limitation on, is this practice going to stop once the bonds are retired?
Yes, the bonds end December of 2024, so a few years out yet.
I could have sworn I'd seen that in here, but I can't find it now. So we will not see this before the council after 2024 then.
Correct.
Thank you. That is all I had.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. We move to general orders. We have 3 items tonight. The first is a resolution to amend the lease agreement for the Illinois State University Art Gallery. Move.
Move approval?
Thank you.
Second.
Second. Any staff comments before we?
Well, we came to council a couple months ago asking authorization to extend the lease for a short period of time while we evaluated whether or not the art gallery space was required to be charged market rate. We wanted to check into that with our bonds that funded the construction of the parking deck, and also check with the Tiger Grant process. And through that process, we learned that there was not, we believe there is not a requirement to charge market rate. So in the course of conversations with Illinois State, the staff has worked with ISU to present to council this lease extension for a period of 60 months, 5 years, continuing on with basically the status quo of our agreement with ISU and how they are currently using this space. And that means that Illinois State pays for utilities. They reimburse the town for custodial services and general maintenance costs. And that is it in terms of our arrangement with them.
Great. Mr. Nord and then Mr. McCarthy.
This space is roughly half as large as the One Uptown space. One Uptown rents for $35,000. So if this is half as large, then that means the ISU would be receiving essentially $17,500 in benefit. So it's obvious what ISU is benefiting from this deal. What's the financial benefit that taxpayers are receiving who paid for this building?
Well, in a conversation, email exchange, Mr. Nord, I indicated that this is a relationship with Illinois State. We have valued our relationship with Illinois State. This particular operation brings in 17,000 guests to the gallery and to Uptown. I have not put a number to that. I believe that the Convention and Visitors Bureau believes that for every guest, if they stay a day, not even an overnight, I think they equate a $70 per person investment. So I guess we can play those numbers out. I haven't done that. I don't recall if that's in the report or not, but certainly we believe there's a value to university galleries in that space. And so I guess it's up to council to determine that.
If it were a business that was in that space, that property would then be property tax generating if it's a for-profit business, correct?
That would be correct.
So ISU doesn't pay property tax in that space, or that space does not generate property tax with ISU in there, is that correct? Okay, so if we were to rent it out to a business, we would be generating property taxes, which our schools desperately need. And if that business were selling product, then we'd be generating sales tax as well. And instead of taxpayers subsidizing the property, we'd be generating a revenue from it as well. So I don't quite understand the decision to rent this out for free when we've got businesses that have requested to move into Uptown, and there's the opportunity for taxpayers to start generating an income on some of the property that they've invested in. So that's one of my concerns. Another point is we had talked as a council here at our work group meeting, and we voted that we wanted to start moving the town out of One Uptown or addressing that $35,000 a month lease somehow. Well, we've got this space in the bottom of this building right next to, right actually in City Hall, which if that staff needs to be close to City Hall, it seems logical that we would use that space to move some of the staff from One Uptown into that space. If we tie up this property with a free rent lease, then it also ties our hands from being able to move staff into that property as well. So I don't see that as being something that we should really be doing. We shouldn't take that space off the table until we've kind of figured out that plan. ISU does have space at the airport. They've got a gallery there as well, so they may have other options. I don't know. You know, I would like to see this go back, be renegotiated to something that's more favorable for taxpayers, or consider what we're going to be doing with the One Uptown space before we tie our hands.
Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I quickly grabbed that $70 number times that, roughly over the 5-year lease of the 17,000, if that's accurate. It's roughly about $6 million of net economic impact, if that number from CVB is accurate, just FYI. I guess I've got a different perspective than Mr. Nord on this property. So we had a dirt floor and the ground level of a parking garage, and ISU came along and dumped $2 million into it. And now we have a $2 million property that, if needed, when ISU decided to leave, we could rent. Sounds like the taxpayers have gotten quite a bit of value from a dirt floor and the ground level of a parking garage, seems to me. Plus all the economic impact. Now, I've been to a number of events and they're all free. That's the other thing. This isn't a business. If this were a business, I might have a different perspective. I might be talking different talking points than we are tonight. But it's an education institution that isn't charging any money for this space, and it's drawing a lot of people that are eating in our restaurants and drinking wine and shopping in our shops and buying candy and cupcakes. I'm trying to think of all the retail, buying ice cream and the cookie shop and Windy City Wieners and buying wine, hopefully from Stave and Maggie's and the pizza place and all the retail establishments that they're helping to generate lots of sales tax for our Uptown. So I think as an attraction, also on our strategic plan, one of our key things is our partnership with Illinois State University, and right on the boundaries of our Uptown is our largest employer in the town of Normal, who's put a free tourism attraction in a formerly dirt space of a ground floor parking garage and dumped $2 million into it. For me, I don't know. It seems like a heck of a deal for a dirt floor that we had and had no prospects of doing anything with. And it seems to be generating a lot of foot traffic that's helping a lot of businesses in Uptown. So for me, it seems like a heck of an investment. I don't know if the CVB's numbers are right, but that would be on top of that $2 million investment from Illinois State University. Again, if it was a revenue generating business, I think I might be having different talking points with you guys tonight, but since it's not, it's an academic institution that's generating tourism revenue. I'm supportive of this lease for now.
My opinion on this, and I've got pretty strong ones in that, is the amount of money Illinois State University put into that project up front. I mean, if you take a look at that from a real estate position, that wasn't even a vanilla box. There was no floor, there was no plumbing, there was no heating, HVAC, there's no electrical.
Nothing.
It was a raw space. It was encapsulated with an exterior on the space. In terms of a retail space, you know, people look at retail space as A, B, and C retail. That's a C retail space. That's not a good retail space. There's no adjacent parking to that except in the parking deck. Most retailers want the ability to park. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can park there all the time, but people want to see that. And it's odd. It was oddly configured for a retail business. We looked at retail businesses early on, and we looked at some office use in that. And because it was a raw space, it was not built out, there was no interest in that space. Illinois State University and the town got together on this, seeing it as Mr. McCarthy referred to as a win for the community and a win for the university. I'm kind of an art person, and I rarely went to ISU galleries because, one, you couldn't find them unless you knew exactly where you were going, and you couldn't park anywhere near it. And since the gallery has been in there, the community involvement in that space is incredible. If you do the math, that's about, they're paying about $35,000 a month for that space in the first 5 years. And I think giving them some breathing room and acknowledging the money up front that they put into that project and what it has done for the community, it gets my strong support. Mr. McCarthy and then Mr. Nord and then Ms. Smith.
I just forgot to ask a question. As I understand it and read the materials, they're covering the cost of maintaining this space.
Correct.
Okay. And I did want to,
Well, just to clarify, that the town pays basic, or covers general maintenance that a landlord would ordinarily cover. If they wanted to put up a wall or something in terms of their gallery space, they would notify us, but that would be their expense.
okay. So any improvements, any capital investments is all the responsibility of the owner?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's what I was asking. And then, although I would like to agree with you, and I wish it were true, a Class C dirt floor can't command what one uptown can. I wish it could, but it can't. And I was around when that thing got built, and there was no options. It was a dirt, leaky, roofed space that was doing nothing but collecting more dirt. So, yeah.
I'm going to switch up the order because Ms. Smith hasn't had a chance to talk yet. So, Ms. Smith.
Thank you. I am aware that ISU has funding challenges, despite the fact that they have Illinois and state in their name. They do only receive about 20% of state support, which is far below what Champaign-Urbana gets. And despite that, they are a competitive university in the state's system. Having said that, however, they have been successful in getting the funding of a single donor who is writing a check for more than $1 million that will then allow that complex to be named. Governor Pritzker was here just last week to announce for the second time the promise of some funding for some desperately needed art spaces on campus. And while I can respect that, if you did the math, then if the uptown space is valued at $35,000 for that square footage per month, if this is at half of that, then by rights, we have provided them a benefit of $17,000 a month. What you have indicated is that there are 17,000 visitors per year. So I doubt that we are getting a benefit equivalent to the rent we are forfeiting if it is equated to the rent we are providing to the uptown developer. And while I respect your assessment that the university invested in this space, they invested it, but we advanced the funds to them to do that, and they reimbursed us for the use of those dollars. And now we are saying, let them have this space without any rent attached. And if you look at the schedule, Schedule A in this packet, under lessor, which is the town, virtually every maintenance item falls as the landlord's responsibility. The lessee has nothing in their column. And beyond custodial expenses, we are not receiving any compensation to allow us to wean off of having them as a tenant for when hopefully the space does command the attention of a for-profit tenant. And locking this in, my second problem is locking this in for 5 years. We are continuing and taking the position that we believe that the town needs government subsidies in our community for the next 5 years to attract residents into the uptown space. I was meeting with Charlie Moore and Patrick Hoban with EDC, and both of them are talking about how we are potentially on the cusp of some major economic opportunities here. And I know there is a sense of negativity that questions whether this can happen, but both of them were pointing out that we can be our own worst enemy when we continue to emphasize what we don't like and what has happened as opposed to looking ahead. But with Rivian coming on board with their jobs, Brant needing jobs, other employers that Patrick is working to sell our community to, we need to be mindful of positioning ourselves for the future and not repeating the practices of the past. And a 5-year lease doesn't give us any opportunity to pivot to a for-profit business coming into that space, that if we succeed in gaining the economic development that can be an offset of these businesses in these coming years, then there will be businesses that will be knocking at our door saying, we want to locate here. And if we commit to this 5-year lease, we don't give ourselves the opportunity to make that possible.
I'm just going to add to that because I've had experience with this in my own business. Lease arrangements are not often, or most often, are very level month to month, but a lot of times they're not. And when I signed a lease, when I did a business expansion, I negotiated a lower rate initially to get and made up with it for a higher rate down the road so I could make that transition and maintain my cash flow. And I think what we see here is a reverse of that, where we have Illinois State University who paid double what the market rate was for the 5 years. And for that reason, I see this next 5 years as a leveling. Now, 5 years after that, we probably have a different conversation. But I see that as a leveling over a 10-year period.
May I? In response to that, the fact that they paid as much as they did in the initial part of this lease, again, I would not call that a lease payment. I would call that an installment payment to compensate for the improvements to the space.
Mr. Nord.
I would echo what Ms. Smith said as well. I guess you didn't front the money. They had a build-out, so that was build-out expense. And then normal leases then would have some sort of lease term beyond the build-out. But the property is no longer unimproved. It is improved. So we need to recognize what it is today, not what it was 5 years ago. But my question is, what is the out clause for the town or a future council if we decide to end the lease before the 5-year term?
Well, I'm going to have to defer to legal counsel on that. I do want counsel to be aware that earlier today, I understood that we could terminate the lease, or ISU could terminate the lease, but it's only under certain conditions that the lease could be terminated within the 60-month period. So Jason can certainly fill us in on the details.
Yeah, that's correct. The termination of the lease was put in with the original lease, and it
Can
provides
you
that.
get a little closer to your
Sorry
microphone?
about that. The termination provisions were provided for in the original lease, and that states that either party may terminate the lease upon 10 days written notice of material breach. That hasn't been amended at any point throughout this lease and the subsequent amendments to it, so that would still stand. If we wanted to get out of the lease, it would have to be for a material breach such as non-payment of perhaps like the maintenance costs, or if they were to keep hazardous materials, for example, in the space, it would be for those reasons, not because we were just wanted to end the lease.
Wow. So if we vote on this tonight, we literally lock this lease up until,
2020.
well, everybody goes through an entire election cycle.
That's accurate.
That is a long time. And this lease, if I understand, this is a combination of 6 different leases that have been amended and amended and amended. Is that right? We don't have like one master lease now?
Well, there is one lease. What I sent you this morning was copies of all the various council reports. There was an original lease that was amended and amended. So, I mean, they're not all separate leases. They've been amendments from the original I think we originally discussed this in 2013 or 2014 with ISU, and then amended it around 2016. We went to council, I believe, in a couple months ago with another amendment to extend it through February of 2020, and then this would be an amendment.
This will be another amendment. Wow, that seems like a lot. I would like to see like one clean lease that has all the amendments kind of combined into just one document going forward if we're going to be doing it, because that seems cumbersome if anything's ever questioned.
I'm going to go to Ms. Cummings. I think you're next to speak, but I just want to say something so that we're absolutely clear on this. Illinois State University paid the full $2.1 million to build this space out. Whether there was the time frame and they did it was 30 days later or not, Illinois State University paid for the total build out of that property. Let's be clear on that. Ms. Cummings.
I think you hit on thing, and one of my biggest questions was answered. But one more thing that stands out, and I don't know if you all can assist with this tonight, but there's been several comments of moving current facilities to that location. And I know that that's not cookie cutter in any circumstance. So we're looking at money then needing to be utilized and also approved by council in order to build out for our own needs and assessments, based on assessments of what our needs would be for that type of space. Is there any way to know roughly, even based off of what we spent most recently for our current space, what that would look like in dollar-wise?
Not at this point. I would want to look at the numbers and rather than just throw a number off the top of my head.
Ms. Lorenz.
Yeah, I did some calculations of the $2.1 million, and you divide that out over the 6 years that this has been in existence, and that puts it at around $45, $46 a square foot. And so when you amortize that over what is going to be 11 years, adding 5 onto the 6, that puts it at around $23 or $25 a square foot, which is probably more in line with a business district like what is represented here. So I don't know exactly how the negotiations went, but I would assume that they probably did the same calculations I just did and felt that $23 a square foot for their investment over this period of time was about what they wanted to pay. And I kind of can't blame them for that. So I'm not as bothered by the structure. It is kind of a reverse of what you were describing, Mayor, that more of the money came up front as opposed to it coming later. But it is what it is. So when it's in that terms, I would encourage us to kind of look at it as more acceptable. Now, The other thing to keep in mind, and 5 years does seem like a long time, but I think that perhaps in another 5 years, they'll be looking at a much improved fine arts building, perhaps with space that's even better than what they have in the current university galleries. So they may not really be in the market for this additional space. And so I think it is a very different conversation that we have 5 years from now. By then, things will be much more mature on the hopeful economic development, and the businesses may be much more plentiful than they appear to be right now in this sort of emerging state that we're in. So I'm comfortable with the 5 years. In the big scheme of things, it doesn't seem that long to lock into that. I don't make decisions based on election cycles, so I'm not sure how that would factor into the fact that everybody stands for election between now and then. I want us to do what's right for Illinois State, what's right for this community, and I especially don't want to punish that decision based on a decision having to do with other property on the second floor of One Uptown. I think we need to keep the two topics separate. Yes, they're both related to rental property in Uptown, but let's not start to, confuse the two. So on that note, I offer it up as a point of support for the way it's written.
Mr. Preston.
Okay, I'm going to start with a few questions. There's a lot I want to touch on here. For staff, first, when we had originally extended this from last fall until now the end of this month, and didn't know if the Tiger grant would require us to charge a market rent for that space. Did ISU still express interest in continuing at the current location before knowing if there would be a rent rate attached, or was that is that something that, hey, if the town of Normal does have to charge rent, no problem, but that's a deal breaker for us?
Well, Mr. President, the only thing I can share with you is that there were conversations between the Illinois State Legal Counsel and Town Legal Counsel about the status of the agreement, the lease agreement, and what we were going to be exploring. And I wasn't privy to the exact details of who thought what about a particular lease payment. I can't share that.
Okay. Were there discussions with ISU about paying any rent in this next 5-year term, regardless of the conversation with Tiger, or is that something you're not?
There
privy
were
to?
discussions about the town was exploring that. That's about all I can share with you. I will add that back in let me take a quick look. I have it on my phone. 2013, it was one of the documents I forwarded to Mr. Nord today. October of 2013, the City Council took action to authorize the lease agreement with the Board of Trustees of Illinois State for the ISU Art Gallery. And one of the statements in that report indicated that once the initial 5-year lease is concluded, it is envisioned that the parties will enter into another lease agreement providing for the use of the space by ISU for its university art galleries for an extended period with no lease payment obligations other than the cost of utilities and routine maintenance. And that was dated October of 2013. 2013.
2013.
So those have been our staff's general direction since entering into the lease agreement, but we did have conversations with them that we would be exploring potential market rate because we thought there was a chance we'd have to charge that as part of the Tiger grant or our bonding requirements.
Of the 17,000 annual visitors to the art galleries that's noted in the packet, do we have a feel, or does CVB or the art galleries have a feel for how many of those are coming specifically for the art gallery compared to how many of those are already planning to be in Uptown? I mean, we're talking about the economic impact there. Are we talking that these are 17,000 people who do not live in town and came down specifically to build a day or an afternoon around the art galleries and then the surrounding uptown? Or is this anybody who's walked in the door of the University Art Galleries and may have already been in uptown anyway, regardless of whether they were going to stop at the galleries or not?
I would answer that by saying, do we apply the same standard to the Garlic Press? Do we apply the same standard to Children's Discovery Museum, that when people are in uptown, that they're there for a specific reason and no other reason? And frankly, I don't think, it would take some significant door polling to get that information. How many are students that came to a opening of an art event and went to Maggie Miley's? We have no idea.
I'm only asking because it did come up in previous comments tonight, used as
No, I
a
understand.
reference point in support and talking about the economic impact, and I want to make sure that we understand the reality of the economic impact to the best that we can.
Correct.
Well-
If I
I
could add,
didn't
Mayor
start
Kus,
it.
the Convention Visitors Bureau number presumes a per-person spend when they visit the community or spend a time in the community, even if it's going out for lunch. Like, you may live here, but if you go out for lunch and wander uptown and make a purchase, it's the same, you might spend the same amount as somebody who just drove in for the day. I believe that their per-person estimate is $70-ish. But the one thing anecdotally I can share with you is, first of all, I don't have specific data on how many of their guests are coming in for special events or coming in on a school bus, or spending the day in uptown, or maybe walking over from the hotels. But I can share with you that I am aware that there are a couple of conferences that are being hosted at the Marriott, and statewide conferences, and those conferences are using the gallery for part of their function. And I can also share that about a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago, there was traffic stopped on East Beaufort for a while school buses unloaded in the middle of the day. So they do have some school bus activity, not quite the same level as the Children's Discovery Museum, but they did have a school bus pulled over, and I was stopped for a while, as were other vehicles, while the school bus unloaded. So they do bring in busloads of individuals as well.
Final question, if I may, and then I got a couple quick thoughts. Are there any costs that the town will incur as a result of this lease extension over the next 5 years that are not reimbursable by ISU as a result of doing this? Are we going to have any, are there going to be any direct costs incurred by the town?
Well, I don't think I can say never. I don't know what those would be. I'm not aware of anything that wouldn't be covered by our lease agreement with them. I can share that.
My thoughts on this, I like the art galleries. I like university galleries. I like what it brings to Uptown. Of course, I love ISU. I do not like how this specific lease extension is structured. There are some concerns that were mentioned by some others up here earlier that I would agree with. One that I do want to highlight is Ms. Smith mentioned earlier the point about the term of this agreement being 5 years, and we really, in effect, don't have any out clause, and nor does the university, absent a material breach, in which case this could be terminated. I would be more comfortable, and I would think it would provide more flexibility to ISU as well, if that was adjusted to, one, provide more notice, but two, allow there to be an out, though, other than material breach. Second option being, instead of a 5-year lease, doing a single-year lease with 4 auto renewals, meaning that it would then presumably come to us every year in omnibus for renewal, but absent giving the university advance notice, 90, 120 days, it would continue if we decided to. If there was an opportunity that came up, and also for the university, there would be an out structure in place, at least a mechanism for there to be an option That's something that I think is an important point in all of this, rather than locking both institutions up with, in effect, no way to change the timeline of this whatsoever.
Ms. Smith?
As an accountant, I want to emphasize that the build-out is a capital expenditure, that whether it was the university or a for-profit tenant, ultimately, the tenant is to bear the cost of making the space amenable to their purpose. A lease payment is an operating expenditure that is a separate thing that rightfully can be assessed on top of the expense of the capital expenditure for the build-out. So to equate what ISU has invested into this space to make it in its present form does not, in my mind, equate to compensating us for lease payments. And to look at that in terms of $17,000 a month as the market rate for that, if we equate it to what is at One Uptown, that is the benefit. By, in essence, we are extending to ISU. My question is, what is the town getting to equate to that? And while 17,000 annual visitors is respectable, to put that in perspective, the library can average anywhere from 800 to 1,200 visitors a day. So yes, this is a very nice amenity for our community. But for free, I'm questioning that, and certainly not for 5 years. I would be more willing to look at a structure Mr. Preston has proposed to limit it to a 1-year lease, and certainly explore some out clauses that are more favorable to the town supporting its position than to solely look at it would require a breach of contract to get out, for the town to get away from this.
If I could just clarify the comment about the lease payment, the original agreement with the Illinois State that was executed between the town and Illinois State did indicate, it defined a lease payment as the reimbursement for the capital expense. So we have defined that is the lease payment. So from an
not what
accounting
my-
standpoint, that might be very
From
different.
an accounting
but
standpoint,
from the
no.
agreement between the two organizations, that's how we had agreed to it with Illinois State.
I kind of see where this is moving. I think we know where the play on this one, invoking Robert's Rules of Order. Council members allowed to speak twice on any item, and that leaves Ms. Cummings and I think Mr. Preston and Ms. Lorenz an opportunity to speak if they want to, and if you don't, we'll call the roll.
I'll yield my time.
Sure, yeah, I will. I'll take the opportunity, and I would like to offer up an amendment to this, and I'm not sure which route to go and which route staff would recommend, but an amendment to the term of this lease. I guess I would just offer it up that as instead of a single 5-year lease extension, amending the agreement to be a single-year lease extension with then 4 single-year lease extensions, renewal periods. That is a common practice in real estate. I have multiple of such arrangements in my professional business as well. Currently with tenants, and that's a practice that happens all the time. That's probably the best way, I would think, for something to be structured.
So we have a motion for an amendment. Is there a second?
I would second that amendment.
And now discussion on the amendment, and I'm going to ask you to keep the discussion to the amendment and not go back to issues we just discussed broader than the amendment. So the discussion is, do we or do we not do a 1-year lease with 4 automatic renewals? And
For staff's clarification, if this amendment passes, I think we're gonna certainly need to understand it better. So I hear automatic renewals, but I also heard you say come back to council every year. So for a communication to Illinois State, do we tell them that it's something that's automatically renewing every year, or it's all they can be assured of is it's 12 months? And that each year they have to come back to council and ask for approval?
Yeah, no, that's a fair clarification. My thought would be to do it as auto renewal, where it would not come back to council. However, that would create an opportunity, should the council wish to, or the town in general wish to, not extend, for the next single year renewal period, to do so, and to then end the lease, but with more notice than the 3 days or whatever it's currently.
I'll
So
defer
let
to,
me-
I'll
let
defer
me-
to legal
can I
on
do
this,
in-
because there's one issue that you need to clarify. That doesn't make it an auto renewal.
If it doesn't come back to council, it would be an auto renewal, absent, if either party.
So
would-
it's kind of a hybrid auto renewal. Because an auto renewal is the option to auto renew, or the option to say, I don't want to renew. That's what you're offering the tenant.
It would be an auto, in my mind, it would be an auto renewal, but with a clause that allowed more flexibility for either party to not extend it for the next renewal period, being a single year.
Jason, I'm going to defer to you because I don't see that as an auto renewal.
I guess what I'm hearing is if no action were taken after a year, it would automatically renew for another year. But perhaps in the lead up to the renewal date, there would be a window in which either party could terminate the lease.
You got it. Yep, and I would make the window longer than 3 days or whatever it is currently. 10 days, yeah.
And it's at now.
That clear for staff?
Yes. I think it's generally clear for staff. I'm not sure if Illinois
We'd have
State
to
wants
negotiate that
to
with Illinois State
speak or
University. It's
just
not our
to
call.
take this up after the fact in terms of discussion.
What would be the appropriate amendment then for me to have made if this is?
It's your amendment, Mr. Preston. I can't help you on that because I don't support it.
If there are questions, a point of order.
Please wait to be recognized by the chair.
Sorry.
Mr. McCarthy is next on that.
Yes, a couple of things about this. Fair point, and I'll defer to your real estate expertise, Mr. Preston, far more in depth than mine. But the unique nature of this business, I would imagine, is really very difficult.
Kevin, can you get on the microphone?
Sorry, thank you. I said, I would imagine that the unique nature of this business, it would be very, very, very difficult to find a suitable place with 30 days' notice. I'm philosophically opposed to the amendment because of the difficulty of Illinois State University to source a space like that in this community. If they don't have one available on campus, I don't know where they would go when you start to think about it. So I think the uncertainty that introduces, I'm not going to speak for ISU, but just trying to consider the ramifications off the fly of this idea. What the practical implication would that be should we decide to exercise? Part two.
Can I clarify real quick? I'm not sure where the 30-day notice came from, but I would think it would be much more appropriate to do a 90 or 120-day, a longer period that would address that.
So, which brings up part two is it seems like we're trying to lease negotiate up here
Yeah.
without
Can't work.
Illinois State University having the benefit of being at the table discussing what they may or may not want. So I'm not sure it's appropriate for us to be lease negotiating here at the table because we're not actually having a conversation with Illinois State productively rather than staff. And so, I'm not supportive of addressing the topic this way because we're locking staff into some kind of a lease the tenant may not be the slightest bit interested in. We don't know. We don't have the opportunity to hear from them. And I certainly wouldn't want to put Illinois State University on the spot right here, right now, to do that. And so, for those two reasons alone, I'm not supportive of this way of approaching your question.
Mr. Nord, and then Ms. Smith, and Ms. Lorenz.
It seems like maybe the more appropriate motion might be to table it so the discussion could happen behind closed doors between the tenant and the town and come up with, some sort of agreement that includes what Mr. Preston has brought up and other members of the council, and then bring it back.
Mr. Nord, I'd ask you to hold that motion to table while we're on the amendment and then bring that up when we...
It'd be modifying his amendment because the discussion was,
Motion to table stops
Okay.
all discussion, and we go immediately to a vote. And that needs to be handled under the overall ordinance, not under the amendment. It's a totally
Okay,
appropriate
sure, just out of order.
motion. Ms. Smith?
Well, that was a point of order that I needed some clarification on. So with the amendment motion on the table, until the vote is taken on that, it would be best to defer any motion to table.
Correct.
Thank you.
Tell you what, and in light of this conversation, fair points made all the way around. Can I, point of order, can I retract
Yes, you can.
my proposed amendment?
Yes.
All right.
And Ms.
And I
Smith,
can
you were
second
the
that.
second, you retract your second. Okay.
And therefore,
The amendment is pulled. Ms. Lorenz has the floor next, and then Ms. Smith, and then Mr. Nord, if they don't beat you to it.
Thank you. I just want us to keep in mind something that is pointed out in the community impact portion of our report on this, and that is the value that we have strategically placed on our partnership with Illinois State University, and to cultivate and grow the town-gown relationship. We know that Illinois State is a huge asset to us, and for us to be potentially renegotiating here at the table, I think is a disservice to this valued partner, and really goes counter to our strategic directions. And frankly, if I'm ISU out here listening to this, I'd start to really wonder how solid that town-gown relationship is. And I'm a little concerned about that right now. For us, that while the intention of the conversation and the debate here is good, let's not lose sight of the fact that this is a valuable partner, and we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish and find ourselves without that valuable partner playing nicely with us. I think would be a real disservice to this community.
Thank you. Everyone's spoken twice on this, so I will entertain Mr. Nord's motion to table this, if you so desire to do that.
Sure. I move to table this decision for 2 weeks, if that's enough time for staff to go back to the tenant and renegotiate the lease.
I believe it has to be date certain, so for sure, is that accurate, Jason?
That's correct. It would have to be
So-
the next meeting, but
To the next meeting,
weeks.
whatever
Okay.
Thank
whatever
you.
that date is.
Is there a second?
point of order. Is his tabling the motion with those specific terms something that we're passing on, or simply tabling the motion until the next meeting to
It's
address all of
to
these
give
concerns?
staff opportunity to interact with the owners.
Then I will second that motion.
Okay. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
No.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
No.
Ms. Cummings?
No.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
No. The tabling motion fails, and now we're voting on the overall motion, resolution to amend the lease agreement for Illinois State University Art Gallery. Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Ms. Smith?
No.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved, and the resolution is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance amending Section 8.1-9, Public Ways, of the Code of Ordinances regarding on-street cafe seating in Uptown Normal.
Move approval.
Thank you.
Second.
Discussion on this item.
I've got a
Mr.
question.
Preston.
So I was on JBC talking about this morning, and a question came up that was a good one on air, and I'd like to ask it to staff here. Seeing as we are limiting it to up to one parklet permitted on each side of the street in the 100 block and the 200 block of North Street, as well as the 100 block of East Beaufort, what happens in the case that there are two businesses, if such exists, within one of those blocks on the same side of the street, and both would like to pursue a parklet? Is it just whoever comes first and whatever their plan is? That's
We could run an auction on that one, couldn't we? No.
That is a good question. I'm going to invite Town Planner Mercy Davison to come forward. Mercy's been working with the Uptown Partners and has been also reviewing best practices and what happens in other communities, so she really is our parklet expert. And Public Works Director Wayne Aldrich is also involved in terms of approving the details of the actual parklet development, but in construction. But Mercy is probably the best person to answer your questions.
Yeah, so it would be a combination of factors. It would not be based on like the first application submitted. There would be a deadline, so they would all be reviewed at the same time. It would be based on things like the design of the parklet, the operations plan, the type of service they'd be offering. So it would be a bit subjective, but that it would be based on just kind of how the business would be run in the parklet space.
Ms. Smith?
And I had raised a concern with you about cords running across the sidewalk, and are there outlets hidden in the planters?
Yes, so there are outlets in the planters right now. There wouldn't be a scenario where someone would run a cord across the sidewalk. Yeah, there would not be.
And these parklets would still maintain the sidewalk access to be compliant with wheelchair accessibility and the width sufficient. It would just be building into the parking space itself?
That's correct. There should be no impact physically on the sidewalk.
Mr. Nord?
The power outlets and the planters, are those hooked in, like, who pays for the power for that? Would the tenant pay for the power, or is that city paid power?
I mean, the town, that is it's metered that in such that we pay for it, but the application fee would be higher for someone using power. So we just estimated a cost and said $50 extra if you're using the outlet.
Okay, and that should cover whatever power expense over that time period?
That seemed reasonable, yeah.
Further discussion on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item 9 is an ordinance granting a special use permit for adult use cannabis at 501 Northtown Road, which should say 501 West Northtown Road. Wouldn't you agree, Ms. Smith?
Yes, I would agree.
Move approval.
Thank
Second.
you. Second.
I seconded.
Second. And discussion. Mr. Nord.
I'm interested in hearing what the church said about this when the town reached out to them.
Well, I guess I'll invite Ms. Davison to come back. There probably are comments in the Zoning Board of Appeals minutes in the back of the packet if the church made any comments during the public hearing process, but Ms. Davison can summarize what was heard at the public hearing.
There were no comments at the public hearing. We did not hear from the church.
Did we reach out to the church proactively?
Yeah, so with all of our items that go to zoning board, we send out notice to all property owners within 400 feet. So certainly the church would have, the property owner would have gotten that notice. I don't know if the church owns that property. We also put a sign, though, in the front yard of the Green Solution, which is right across the street, for like a week in advance of the hearing, and that's how we get most of our comments, honestly, people driving by and seeing there's a zoning action happening, call this phone number if you have questions, and we didn't hear from anybody. And of course, it was published in the paper and online.
Sure, just with it being a church and there's special restrictions around a church, I'm just disappointed that we don't have their input, but thank you.
Hopefully, I mean, with as much press and media attention this has received in late 2019 and early 2020, I can't imagine that anyone who was interested couldn't have known.
Right.
But I suppose that's always a possibility.
Well, I guess I was just telling you what the town had done to get notice to them. I actually know that the Green Solution reached out to them and has spoken with them, and they still didn't call me with any questions or comments, so they definitely know. Someone at the church knows about it.
Further on this item? Ms. Smith?
I was wondering if this would be an appropriate time to go on record to addressing a citizen's concern about the confusion over addresses and how we are resolving that or looking to resolve it.
Yeah, there was a misunderstanding between 501 West Northtown Road and 501 East Northtown Road, and staff has spoken with the owner of the property who was negatively impacted by the action, and we're working through a solution to address it to that owner's satisfaction. Please call the roll.
Ms. Cummings? Aye. Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. We have one item of new business tonight, and that is a motion to approve an appointment to the Sister Cities Committee. Motion for approval?
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The motion is approved. Mr. McCarthy, would you give us some background on that?
I would. With this action, we are appointing Ms. Tsukamoto, who's been involved in the Sister City program for many years as a volunteer and is very passionate about the Sister Cities Exchange program. She's a long-term resident of McLean County and holds a MBA degree from Illinois State University with a focus in finance. She's been employed by Seven Seas Travel and Mitsubishi Motors and is currently employed by Komatsu America as a translator and safety instructor. Ms. Tsukamoto will be filling the open seat with a term expiring March 31st, 2022.
Thank you. And before we go to adjournment, if there are concerns, I will start with a comment. I will say that I attended a very fascinating session at U.S. Conference of Mayors on the upcoming census and how we need to be prepared for that census to get an accurate count of our community. It is vitally important that we get an accurate count of our community so we get the representation we need from the federal government. One of the topics that came up is this is the first time there has been a census in the age of the internet, and people are already seeing some people would say misinformation, but more accurately is disinformation in terms of who can be counted, who can't be counted, things like that. And efforts that communities and the state need to make to counteract this and to ensure we get a fair and accurate count in the census. And I will say from a lot of the information that I heard at that session, our complete count committee is well on top of that and moving in the right direction. But it's just very important for people to understand that it is critical we get a fair and accurate count in the census. Mr. McCarthy.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to touch on, if you've been reading the paper or national news lately, we've been hearing a lot of good news about our very own Rivian Automotive lately, and I just wanted to, although we haven't talked about it much up here. Just wanted to touch on, take a minute to kind of acknowledge the latest news that Rivian's going to be building the platform for Lincoln's new electric vehicle. That on top of an Amazon investment and order of $100,000 van order from them, and then the latest funding round from T. Rowe Price, putting their funding of over $3.5 billion for a normal company is nothing short of amazing. When we think about 3 short years ago, we were facing an automobile plant that was about to be auctioned off, shuttered, and then demolished. We now have a company, I don't have the latest numbers, I understand we'll have them relatively soon, but over $20 million of investment in the plant and somewhere north of 200 jobs. Don't quote me, members of the media, exactly, because I don't have the exact numbers, because I don't think they're available exactly yet. But I hope that those in our community that have been nervous about Rivian and somewhat skeptical are comforted by these large investments and these large orders, and the fact that hundreds of people have new jobs here in the town of Normal, and Rivian's investing tens of millions of dollars in the plant here. I hope that puts you at ease and gives you some confidence that Rivian is in fact a real enterprise and a real company doing good things, and I hope everybody will join in supporting and cheering for Rivian. They've got a lot of work to do yet, and economic development is a risky business. This one seems to be going well, and I applaud them and wish them continued success. And it's amazing and great news for the town of Normal.
Right. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
I'm sorry, Ms. Cummings?
Really quickly, because I know it's getting late, but Tuesday night, I, along with my Bloomington counterpart, Jeff Crable, participated in the McLean County History Museum's Community in Conversation, and it was very eye-opening to have that type of dialogue for the evening, talking about who has the opportunity to own or select their job. And so there is a series of conversations that they will be having. The next one is on Tuesday, February 27th. It will be at Heartland Community College at 4:00 p.m. And the third one, there's 4 of them, but I have also the third one here, which is on Saturday, March 21st at the YWCA at 12:00 p.m. Some of their partners who helped to put the event on included the Bloomington Normal Trades and Labor Assembly, AFL-CIO, Illinois Partners for Human Services, LIUNA, and Dreams Are Possible. They were partners for that particular night. An overall sponsor of this event is the Town of Normal Human Relations Commission. So I encourage all of you to attend if you can, the McLean County History Museum's A Community in Conversation event.
Thank you. Ms. Smith?
I wanted to extend a thank you to Mr. Fansler for first of all, reaching out to the council with your emails and then taking the time to show up here in person to express your concern. And I apologize if I had not answered you in a timely manner. I confess that I'm concerned about contradicting what might be the reality of what has transpired, and I often defer to Ms. Reese and wait for her to respond, but I need to do a better job of making sure that citizens who take the time to reach out to us are encouraged and get a response, because there's nothing like silence to frustrate an individual, and for that I apologize.
Mr. Nord?
I would like to echo what Ms. Smith said. That was a fantastic thing to say, because really without the citizens, what are we here for? And thank you, Doug.
Motion for adjournment.
If I could just clarify for a moment, I did email Mr. Fansler, and I think council was included on that. So, I mean, there was a reply that was dated January 24th, I believe. So, just so the record shows that.
No, you're not the problem.
Motion for adjournment, please.
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Ms. Smith?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Ms. Cummings?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, we are adjourned.
Just to be clear, there weren't very many answers in that reply, though. Thank you, though.
You didn't like the answers.